Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. The Riverlands 305 AC. Sir Davos. He rode his horse closer to the king's Davos, most keen to speak to him alone before he took to the air. While he agreed with the fact that Sir Geralt had to be killed, the how of it felt wrong to him. Aegon was a little too bloodthirsty, and the death was both far too public and politically, it could create a huge problem with Dorne. House Dane was an important house, and while it had been clear that there was no love lost between Ned Dane and his cousin, they were still blood. Davos found himself wishing that the Lord of Starfall hadn't already left before the events had taken place. Had he been here then, he could have raised any objections he had, and would at least have had first-hand knowledge of what Sir Geralt had done. It wouldn't have changed the man's fate, Davos was certain of that, but it may have alleviated some of the problems that his fate may now cause them. As he reached Aegon, he looked down at the pin on his chest and felt the headache come on him once more. "Your Grace," he said as Aegon looked to him, "Sir Davos, ready to have your arse kissed by some lords." Aegon said, smiling, "I think it'll be your own getting kissed, Your Grace, not mine," he replied with a chuckle, as he looked to the Queen, who was riding a little ahead of them, speaking to Tyrion with the red dragon on her shoulder. What's that phrase they say about the hand? The king shits, and the hand wipes. I think you'll find you have your arse kissed just as much as mine. Aegon said, and Davos saw Sir Jaime smirk. "Sir Geralt, Your Grace?" he asked, and the smirk from the knight's face fell even quicker than the one from the king's did. Davos, knowing that Sir Jaime had thought highly of House Dane, got what he deserved. "Davos," Aegon said firmly. "He did, but the how if it, Your Grace, and the where of it," Davos said, trying to explain his concerns. "You know how traitors were punished in the north, Davos, how the kings of winter killed those who'd broken their oaths, or gone against their king." Aegon asked, and Davos shook his head. Sir Jaime now leaning in a little closer on his horse so he could listen in. "No, Your Grace," he replied. "They were hung from the branches of the weirwood tree, Davos. Their stomachs were opened up and their insides removed and laid out amongst the branches. Some died quickly, but most lived for some time before they drew their last breath. They were let there as a sacrifice to the old gods, their blood to feed the tree and their insides to feed the crows." Aegon said, "Your Grace? For those who truly did wrong, whose crimes were so bad that even that sentence seemed a mercy, they faced a different one. Have you ever heard of the Blood Eagle, Davos?" Aegon asked. "No, Your Grace. Each one of the ribs is cut away from the spine, Davos, and then the lungs are pulled out through the opening, making it look as if it were the wings of an eagle," Aegon said. "That's horrific," he said. "That's the north, Sir Davos." Aegon replied. "Sir Geralt got off easy, Your Grace," Sir Jaime said, forcing Davos to turn and look to the knight and then back to the king. "He did, Sir Jaime. That man tried to take my wife from me. My child. He tried to kill my queen and my heir, Davos. Any husband would see that the man who did that would suffer for the attempt, and any king would do everything in his power to send a message to any who would dare try such a thing. Let them think me bloodthirsty or unjust, and let them name me a monster. If Dorne takes issue with it, then so be it. They'll take issue enough with me already, so let them take issue with this as well. But all will know what happens should they attempt to harm what's dearest to me in this world. They'll know that my retribution will be swift, and that my mercy will be non-existent. They'll know, and in that knowledge, it'll protect those I love, and that Davos is worth them thinking. Whatever they will of me, having them name me a monster is a small price to pay compared to that." Aegon said, and Davos watched as the king nodded before he rode over to be with his wife. He rode with Sir Jaime, a little further, the knight looking more to the king than to him, and so Davos was shocked when he actually spoke. "He's right, Sir Davos. You may not have the stomach for seeing what he did, but he's right. Was it your own wife, or your own babe?" "I've not seen my wife in years, Sir Jaime. I doubt she'd speak to me were I to go back to her now. I lost my sons, all of them, and she'll not forgive me for that. But, you're right, we're my own," he said. "I've seen bloodthirsty men, Sir Davos, evil men, and cruel men, men who've lost their way, also as I'm sure you have too." "I have," he said softly, thinking about the things that Stannis did, both those he'd seen and those he'd heard about. "His Grace is none of those things. No, he's not, Sagami. No, he's not, he said with a nod, and he knew that to be true. The king was anything but that. A few miles from the twins, they stopped when the dragons landed. Davos watching on as the king and queen spoke to them as if they were their children. The red dragon chirped excitedly as the two larger dragons looked at it, and had he not seen it for himself, then he'd not have believed things so large could be as gentle as they were. The two larger dragons moving their heads so they could touch them against the smaller one. Davos and everyone else looking on in silence as they did so. After a few moments, the queen handed the red dragon over to Missandei, and Davos found himself chuckling as she then chastised it. When it showed its displeasure, "No, you are to behave. If I find out you've not, then I'll not let you sleep with us tonight," the queen said as the dragon screeched back at her and then chirped happily. When the king spoke to it, "Aye, soon enough, little dragon. Soon enough, you can fly with us," Aegon said. They climbed on the dragons and took to the air, and Davos gave the order from them to ride. The twins were soon in view, and the river lords rode out to greet them. He saw Sir Jaime stiffen when he saw the man who he assumed to be Edmure Tully. Aegon had told him of what the knight had said and done when he broke the siege at River Run. Tyrion had then suggested that it would be for the best for his brother to not be a part of their party when they greeted Edmure and the others. But Aegon had overruled him. "Jaime is a member of our Dragon Guard and has proved himself to his king and queen. Let any who think differently raise it with me, and they will find their complaints will be found most unwelcome." Aegon said, "Viserys, Jaime, Jorah, and Brienne, Grey Worm, Hono, along with Tyrion and Missandei, the red dragon, resting now on her shoulders, all rode out to meet the river lords. Davos looking to their sigils to try and place who was who once he reached them. He saw the silver trout of House Tully, the quartered green dragon and white tower of House Vance, the pink maiden of House Piper. There was also the silver eagle of House Mallister, the blue wavy bend on gold of House Goodbrook, and the flock of ravens surrounding the weirwood tree of House Blackwood. My lords, my name is Sir Davos Seaworth, hand to their graces, King Aegon and Queen Daenerys of the House Targaryen," he said as the auburn-haired Lord Edmure sat on his horse and glared angrily at Sir Jaime. And for a few moments, no one replied. "Where are their graces?" Lord Blackwood asked to break the silence, and Davos smiled when he heard the chirp that came from the red dragon, the noise showing that her big brothers had arrived. "If you would but just look up," he said, and he saw the looks on their faces and the way some of them looked to Lord Edmure, before they all watched as Rhaegal and Drogon landed a few feet from them. Almost at once, Sir Jaime, Sir Brienne, and Sir Jorah were standing beside the king and queen, the three knights taking up their positions. Ghost was by their side too, and Davos was unsurprised that he'd not noticed the White Wolf. Its silent approach and quick movement was something he'd gotten more than used to. He noticed how Lord Blackwood looked at the White Wolf. The man was staring at Ghost with an awestruck look on his face, while each of the others looked to the dragons, or Edmure Tully looked to Jaime Lannister. "Forgive us our delay, my lords, but our dragons wish to see more of the Riverlands," the queen said. "There is nothing to forgive, your grace. Perhaps we can take our meeting inside," Lord Yadmir said, looking away from Sir Jaime for the first time. Davos noticed how Axon stiffened. Both he and Tyrion had discussed this, and he had been proved right on it. It was something that was about to be done, so again. The twins may no longer be Walder Frey's domain, Lord Tully, but it already is taking all my restraint, not to see those keeps set aflame. I may understand that it's wrong to wish ill on a place, that it's wrong to want to see it razed to the ground, and yet my brother, his wife, their unborn babe, and his mother all lost their lives in that place. And not even the old gods or the new themselves will ever make me set foot in it. "Aegon," said Davos, surprised by how calmly he did so. "Of course, your grace," Edmure said while looking to Ikang and staring at him for some time before he found whatever it was he wished to find. Davos watched as Edmure turned to the others, and then as one, the river lords all knelt with their swords in hand. "I, Lord Edmure, Tully, Lord of River Run, do swear my allegiance and that of my house to their graces, King Aegon and Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen, from this day until my last. My sword is yours and my house yours in perpetuity," Lord Edmure said. One by one, the others did the same. Davos smiling as Aegon looked to Daenerys, and she nodded before she bid them all rise. Arise, Lord Tully, and be recognized as our Lord Paramount of the Trident. Arise, my lords, and be recognized as leal men of the crown. On behalf of my husband and I, we accept your oaths of fealty, and we pledge to ask of you no service that brings you dishonor. We will do all in our power to ensure that the Riverlands thrive and grows, and will do whatever may be of help to see that this is true. You have our word that we shall not forget this day, my lords. Daenerys said, and as Aegon nodded, the lords arose. The twins 305 AC. Tyrion. It had gone far better than he would have imagined. The news that Jon Snow was Aegon Targaryen, not having caused any change in the Riverlord's oaths to him, it would seem. He'd stood by while they knelt, and despite the fact that Edmure Tully had constantly glared at Jaime, no words harsh or otherwise had been spoken to his brother. That had surprised him as he'd expected there to be something said. He'd hoped that Aegon would have needed to intercede on Jaime's behalf, and yet nothing had been raised. And he'd not needed to. Whether that was because the mere sight of the dragons had shown that any questions or doubts they may have were better left unsaid, or for some other reason, he knew not. He'd moved as close to Edmure as he could when Aegon had brought Arya to meet him. The man had welcomed his niece with open arms, and Tyrion had heard her say Jaime's name once or twice as they spoke. That he'd been unable to hear what was actually said had irked him, as did the fact that while he sat in a position of honor, it was a lesser position than he should have been. The feast itself, if you could call it that, was held in their tents, Aegon refusing to set foot in the twins, and even he had sympathy with the man for that. Tyrion was sat with some of the lords of the Riverlands, only those not high enough to sit at the high table such as Goodbrook or Piper and Vance. It showed that he was somewhat back in favor with the king and queen, and he'd once again been able to offer his advice, although he'd been overruled constantly. Davos, Aegon, the queen, and even Missandei all pointing out the flaws or wrongs in his arguments, and little he had said had been acted upon. That they were listening at least was a positive, though, as was the fact that he was being treated as one of the inner circle once more. Tyrion found himself wondering if he had but just held his tongue. Would things be different? If he'd been able to hide how he felt about Aegon, would he still be wearing his pin? He believed that he would, and it made him angry with himself. He should have known better, and because he hadn't, he believed his plans may have already failed. Lord Tyrion, do you intend to head back to the west once this war is done? Mark Piper asked, Tyrion taking a swallow of the wine as he tried to clear his head of his thoughts. I intend to serve their graces, Sir Mark, and to do so in whatever role they wish, he said with a smile. I had heard you were Hand of the Queen, Leman Goodbrook asked. His Grace felt it best for his own hand to serve in that role, my lord, he said, trying his best not to sound bitter. Perhaps it's for the best. Then if you do return to the west, my lord, Carol Vance said. I believe I know what's for the best for me, my lord, he said with a smile. So you'll give up your claim to Casterly Rock, then? Mark Piper asked. I am heir to the Rock, Sir Mark, so no, he said, shaking his head. I believe that Lady Jenna may see things differently, Lord Tyrion, Limon said with a chuckle. He listened eagerly as he was then told of events in the west, and he found himself cursing everyone, his aunt, his bastard cousin, his father, the king and queen, even himself. He cursed them, one and all, as he drank more and more. By the time he made his way to his tent, he was very drunk, and still, he was cursing everyone for his misfortune. His plans were in tatters. The queen and the army not sailing, but marching to King's Landing, would see to that. After what Jon Snow had done to Sir Geralt, his chances of splitting him from the queen were almost done for. Tyrion, knowing that she would only love him even the more for, falling into his bed with his wine spilling on the floor, were he a different man, he'd sob, but he could not. Instead, he lay back and was soon asleep, the dreams and the sound of his father's voice soon coming to him. You are no son of mine. I am, your son. Then prove it. The words were still stuck in his head when he woke the next morning. Tyrion getting up and walking to the piss pot and relieving his bladder as he looked around the tent for any sign of some wine, there was none to be found. And he knew that he'd feel this way until he did so. After he'd finished his piss, he quickly dressed and walked from the tent, looking to make his way to find some wine and to break his fast. No doubt they'd be marching today, and he already found himself not looking forward to a long day in the saddle. He found the wine before the food, drinking it down quickly and feeling more like himself once he'd done so. His dreams had made things clear to him, and he knew now what he needed to do. For now, trying to bring down Jon Snow was a wasted endeavor. He needed to win back even more favor before he did so, and to do that he had to appear good and true. Then and only then would the opportunity present itself, and so it was time to begin offering up far better advice. He couldn't be seen to be incompetent, and his advice had to be better than that of those around him. So no more would his words be overshadowed by those of a smuggler or a slave. No, from now on it would be a lion that the dragons listened to once more. Tyrion almost smirking as he walked towards the smell of food being prepared. 20 years his father had served at Arya's side. He'd bided his time and struck only when he knew he'd win. Tyrion doubted he'd have to wait that long for Jon Snow to give him an opportunity, and when he did, then he would show them all he was his father's son. He sat down and was brought over some bacon burned black, before he was then joined by more and more people as they broke their fast. Serra Davos, Missandei, and Grey Worm. Serra Brienne, Serra Jorah, and then Hime. As Tyrion saw the red dragon on Missandei's shoulders, he felt a knot in the pit of his stomach and quickly looked around to see there was no sign of Jon Snow or of Daenerys either. "Their graces," he asked, his throat dry, "have something they need to take care of." Ser Davos said, and Tyrion felt that knot begin to tighten. Clarisle 3005 AC. Euron. The ships had left White Harbor, and so he'd readied the Iron Fleet and taken to the sea. It had been something he'd not wished to do, which had surprised him, although ever since she truly opened her legs for him, he'd felt this way. Usually the chance to fight and to impose his will upon others was what truly excited him. He'd been hard when he sat upon his niece's feet, and had almost spent when he'd killed those 3 bastard snakes. Sailing out into the night and then catching them completely unawares once again proved who it was that truly ruled the sea. It was like Lannisport all over again, and that too felt just as sweet to him. Even these many years later, there had been no better feeling than it, or so he had thought. Not taking a woman, not killing a man, and not even dreaming of being a king had felt as good as proving that out here on the Silence, he truly was a god. The thoughts of doing so to the Dragon Queen's fleet and of taking her for his own had filled his head for weeks. Then Cersei had shown him a side of her that he'd not dreamed she had, and soon his thoughts were only filled with what they could do together. Thoughts of being her king and of her birthing his babe, thoughts of how she tasted and how she felt when he was inside her, all replacing the thoughts of bloody conquest that usually filled his head. When she had told him what she intended to do to the Golden Company, Euron had gotten hard just listening to her speak. The two of them taking their pleasure in each other for the rest of the night, and he found himself being driven on by her words. "Put your babe inside me. Fill me with your seed. My love, my king." He closed his eyes and pictured how she looked, and for Euron, that was something that he had never known before. Women were nothing to him, they were just objects to be used and discarded when they bored him. As for children, what use had he for them? Useless things that would only disappoint a father such as he. Just as his own brothers had no doubt disappointed his own father for showing themselves the false ironborn that they were. But a child of his with her, a lion and a kraken both, that child could bring the very world to its knees and would one day prove himself to be even greater than he. "What the fuck are you doing?" he said, opening his eyes and shrugging off the hand that dared touch him. The silent sailor pointing in the distance and Euron taking the marish eye from his hands. Looking through it, he saw them, the red of the 3-head dragon, standing proud against the black sails, and he smiled, knowing that the fools were sailing right into the Kraken's warm embrace. "Raise the flag," he shouted, and moved to the wheel. The time at hand to end this war once and for all. He looked to the sky to see where the dragons were, frowning when he didn't see them, but he knew they'd be here soon enough. At the bow of the Silence Keeper and Scorpion stood ready, the steel bolts just willing to be fired, and Euron began to laugh as he got that feeling once more. "Come and meet your god," he said, still laughing as the Silence sailed towards the dragon fleet. Dazi. They'd spoken to Davos, and had told him to keep marching, and Aegon had then given chrono orders to scout on ahead, just in case. She then told Missandei to look after Lord Roxley's, and had watched as Aegon had knelt beside Ghost, her husband, not using any words to tell the wolf to look after them both. Bing had gone and spoken to Ordia, and asked her to keep Tyrion in her sights, and then she and Aegon had taken to the air. Finding their ships was no great task, and finding Euron's was even less of a one. Bing feeling her fury rise when she saw them lying in wait. Aegon had told her they needed to fly high and that he'd look through Rega's eyes, something she wasn't even sure could be done, but he told her that he had done so before. After seeing the Aegon fleet and doing as Aegon had asked, she looked over to see her husband was directing her to land, Dany following after him as Rhaegal flew on ahead of her. Soon enough, they began to descend, and once they landed, she looked to see Aegon climb down off Rhaegal's back, Dany joining him and seeing a worried look on his face. Aegon? They have scorpions Dany, one on each of the ships, Aegon said. For our ships? She asked worriedly. For the dragons. Aegon said, and she looked at him shaking her head. They can't. Drogon, I almost lost him, she said, almost panicked. They got lucky with Drogon, Dany. You weren't expecting it. This isn't the Night King, and these aren't ice spears. It'll be men that fire them and men can miss. The scorpions are at the front of the ships, so we need to come in from behind them and we can use the sun to shield us too. We fly in fast, and once we strike, we then fly right back out. We can do this, she said determinedly. We can. I'd not risk you, our babe, or our dragons. If I thought it too dangerous, he said. I know you'd not, she said, as he took her in his arms. Fire and blood, Dany. Fire and blood, she said, kissing him, before they turned and walked back towards the dragons. She stood in front of Drogon and rested her head against his. Dany feeling the calm breathing of the dragon as she did so. Ylvakrinun kisi, siknayut ordrikagon. O nuha trezi. Istiti Sagon Adera, said Dreye. Our enemies seek to harm you, my son. We must be quick and true. Drogon let out what she felt was a snort, and despite the worry she felt, Dany found herself laughing as she climbed up onto his back. Her son was confident that he'd not be harmed, and that was enough to fill her with even more certainty. As she looked to Aegon and nodded, in the merest of moments she was back in the sky, and this time she knew that when next she saw the Iron Fleet, it would be to lay down a dragon's flames upon them. Aegon. Knowledge was a strange thing, he thought. He'd been told of what had happened to Rhaegal, but had not lived through it himself, the same way he'd not truly lived through Daji's attack on King's Landing. He'd seen the scorpions on the walls of the city and had known what they could do, especially after Rhaegal had been lost. Yet he'd not been able to picture them in his head in relation to the Iron Fleet, nor had he been able to figure out how Daji had then gone about single-handedly destroying the fleet herself. Aegon knew that he needed to see it. Only then could he work out a plan of attack. And had he not been able to then, he'd have called this entire thing off. He'd not risk his wife or child. Nor would he risk Drogon and Rhaegal either. His own life he'd risk for theirs. But he'd not ask the same of them in return. So he'd flown high, and through Rhaegal's eyes he'd seen it. And the rest had just come to him after that. After speaking to Dany and telling her what needed to be done, he then walked to Rhaegal and leaned in close to speak to him. Yadra dadra sagan zugagan eminaini yigri henkiri nayotmazi gon yuharakiros. Don't be afraid, we have many years together to come, my friend. He said. That he was repeating the words he'd told him as they fought against the Night King wasn't lost on him or on Rhaegal. Aegon soon feeling the warm air blown from Rhaegal's nostrils as the dragon snorted. Aegon looked to Dany as he climbed up onto the dragon's back, his wife laughing, and her earlier worry and nervousness both were now gone. With a nod to her, they took to the air, Rhaegal eager to get this over and done with, and Aegon feeling exactly the same as how the dragon did. Rhaegal flew high towards the sun, and then as Aragorn readied himself, they began their descent. The ship soon coming into view. Drakkar, he said, and the flames came from the dragon. Aegon looking on as the ship was soon aflame. Pulling up, they dodged a scorpion bolt, and then at his command, the ship that fired it was alight. Rhaegal flying away, once it was, and Aegon looking to see where Drogon was. The black dragon was high in the air, and looking through Rhaegal's eyes, Aegon saw that half a dozen ships were now on fire. Off in the distance, their own ships were just coming into view, and so Aegon directed Rhaegal to those iron-born ships closest to them. Dropping down from the sun's light, they dodged the two bolts that came their way easily. Aegon ordering Rhaegal to see those who had dared to fire would do so no more. Dravers, he said, and Rhaegal duly obliged. How many passes they made he couldn't tell, but there was now a sea of fire beneath them, and as he was doing one more pass, he saw it finally. The ship was larger than the others, and had begun to sail away. Aegon knowing immediately that this was Euron's ship, and that the man himself was still aboard. Konir Rhaegal, Gorogon nete Konir. There, Rhaegal, take me there, he said, and he felt the reluctance of the dragon, Aegon telling him that all would be well. He didn't tell him his plan completely, though, as he knew that the dragon wouldn't follow through. Their bond had grown so much that he could feel the fear that Rhaegal felt, and he knew it was for him that he felt it. Drogon, he was sure, felt the same about his mother. The fear that he'd be left riderless and alone. It was a fear that he'd seen come true, and one he'd make sure remained simply that this time around for his dragon and for his wife's too. "Dracarys," he said as he rose up on the Rhaegal's back, the flames soon covering the scorpion in the front of the ship. As they flew over the rear of it, he saw him standing there and ready to take to the sea. Aegon closing his eyes as he jumped from Rhaegal's back. He could feel the anger from the dragon. The pained roar Rhaegal let out was one that almost broke his heart. The bond they built between them cracking just a little as he rolled on the deck of the burning ship. But he knew this had to be done. The man couldn't be let escape, and the only way he'd know for sure that the Euron was dead would be if he killed the man himself. "Greyjoy," he shouted, long claw in hand as he moved towards him. "You don't look like a Targaryen," Euron said before laughing. "No, but I am one, and it's time for you to pay the dragon's price," Aegon said. "After I kill you, the next time I see the Dragon Queen, I'm going to make her my salt wife. Then when I'm doing fucking her, I'll hand her over to my love, and together we'll begin to tear her apart. Piece by piece," Euron said, smiling at him. "First, you have to kill me, and I've fought far better and far worse men than you. You're no Night King, no White Walker. You're not even a fucking white. You're just a man, and after all I've faced, men are fucking easy," Aegon said as he moved closer and swung Longclaw at Euron's head. The blow was blocked by Euron's axe, and then the flames grew around them and he felt the ship begin to sink. Aegon smiling when his next blow caught Euron across the arm. His pained gasps and step back were the only respite he'd allow him as Aegon began to swing. Longclaw at him once more. The sound of the Valyrian steel as it hit the axe was only added to by the crackling of the wood as it burned. Aegon moved away from a swing from the axe and then was caught by a punch that had him spitting out some blood. Euron laughing loudly once more when he saw it, and that cost him another cut. Aegon quickly catching him across the thigh. "Fucker," Euron shouted as he moved back, and Aegon then saw his chance to end this fight. The ship though listed as he moved, and Aegon lost his footing, Euron grinning maniacally as he moved toward him. He brought Longclaw up to block the blow of the axe, and as Euron moved to crash his head against his own, it was to be the dragonglass dagger that he connected with. Aegon watched as it shattered, leaving the edge of it stuck in Euron's left eye. That he didn't get all of it was the only reason that the blow wasn't fatal, but it brought him to his knees, and that in of itself was enough for Aegon. While still not fully risen from his own feet, he swung Longclaw, the Valyrian steel, hitting the flesh of Euron's neck, and in that contest, there was only ever going to be one winner. He watched as the head rolled down the deck of the ship and into the flames, a look of complete surprise in the one good eye as the head began to burn. Rising to his feet, he looked to the ship and knew it was done for, and so he quickly walked to the side and began removing his armor. That it was leather and not metal made it far easier to do so. When he felt he had enough removed, he jumped into the water, and after a few moments where he was underneath and struggling, he made it back to the top. In the distance, he could see the Iron Fleet was no more, and as he floated, he looked up and he saw that both dragons were unharmed. Aegon smiled when he saw his wife, and then he began to swim towards the nearest of their ships. They'd seen the Night King and the army of the dead both fall, had now seen to Euron Greyjoy and the Iron Fleet. As he swam, he knew he was swimming from the only thing that now stood in their way. For now, he was going in the wrong direction, but he knew that this would be the only quarter that Cersei Lannister would be given. Soon enough, she'd learn what it had taken him a lifetime to understand. He was born to be a dragon, and the only thing a dragon is a slave to is love. As he was helped up into the ship, he looked up to the sky and saw her. "My love, my life, my wife," he said softly, as Dany flew over his head. Dragonstone 305 AC. Dany! She waited until the ship arrived, hoping that the time it took would allow her and Rhaegal to calm down. It did not. Instead, the longer she waited for Aegon to arrive, the angrier she got, and not even Drogon's concern for her made her feel any better. They had a plan, acted upon that plan, and the plan was working, and then he had to go and do that. Of all the things he could do and all the ways he could risk himself, he had to once again jump from a dragon's back, this time onto a burning ship, no less. Closing her eyes, Dany leaned against Rhaegal's head. Her son was just as furious with Aegon as she was, and he too was not ready yet to calm his anger. She stood waiting on the beach as the small boat rowed her way. Her husband looking to her, and whether he could see how furious she was with him or not was hard to tell. That he was not concerned or worried by how she may feel only angered her further, and so his smiling face was met with her scowling one. As the boat reached the shore, Aegon climbed out of it and walked her way, Dany allowing him to greet her with an embrace that she half-heartedly returned.
"You should speak to Reimagined,"
she said, her tone one that clearly showed her annoyance with him. Dany, Aegon said, his own voice finally showing a note of understanding about how she may feel. Rosiego? Aegon, she said, before moving away from him. Rosier nodded to her, and then he walked over to the Green Dragon, Dany looking on as Rhaegal turned his head from her husband when he went to speak. Around them the Unsullied she'd left on the island stood guard, Dany having already let them know that all was well. With her it was, at least in terms of her physical condition, mentally not so much, and she was emotionally fraught. Looking over to Aegon and Rhaegal, was this another day she'd have found herself laughing at the scene in front of her. Today, though, she just enjoyed it differently. Rosiel turned his head from her husband each time he went to speak to him. Yatin watching on as Iakin was forced to walk from one side to another just so he could look into the dragon's eyes. As soon as he managed to do so, though, he was not once more as Rhaegal moved his head away from him each time. At one point, Dany watched as Rhaegal blew air from his snout in such a sign of annoyance that Iakin was almost knocked to the ground by the force of it. The roar that came from the dragon a few minutes later was one of both anger and of fear she felt. That Iakin felt it too was clear by the way he took a knee and began speaking softly. Eventually, after what felt like an hour or more, she heard the different sounds that began to come from Rhaegal. And though she couldn't hear Iakin's words, she did recognize the tone. "Well?" she asked when her husband walked from the dragon. Dany looking to the two dragons as Drogon leaned in and rubbed his head against his brother's neck. "We've reached an understanding," Aegon said softly. "Good," she said before turning and walking briskly away. Aegon following after her. That he didn't try and stop her or speak to her as they walked to the keep was perhaps a good thing. While the Unsullied would not understand the nature of the argument Ajakin had just had with Rhaegal, they would should they argue so publicly, and Dany knew that there was to be an argument between them before the day was done. They hadn't left many on Dragonstone, just enough to keep the castle should any try and take it, but still tale of the king and queen fighting would spread, and so it was for the best. Dinner was done indoors. Looking to the sky, she could see that night wasn't too far off either. And so they would rest up here tonight before flying back to join their army. Whether that rest was together or separate was still to be decided. She thought as she walked into the great hall and passed it into the chamber of the painted table. "Khaleesi?" Fossari asked when she reached the room, the woman looking as if she had hurried to greet her. "All is well, Kui. The Khal and I wish to speak alone," she said, smiling at the older woman. "Thud Khaleesi." "Not for now, perhaps later," she said, as the woman ushered the others who'd come after her, and were carrying wine and food away from the room. She stood at the window and looked out onto the bay below. Aegon standing at the other end of the painted table, and when she turned around to face him, she found herself almost brought back to a different time. Then he'd been telling her that he was risking his life to go on some dumb quest that, in the end, had achieved nothing. She'd been furious with him for that at the time, but he was not hers to tell what he could or could not do. She didn't order him, and she was not his queen. Not then. "Dany," he said, moving towards her. Aegon finally realizing the depths of her anger and worry. "What were you thinking, Aegon?" she said, after taking a breath. He needed to die. Dany, he had to be dealt with, once and for all. Aegon said, looking at her, his expression one that at least showed how worried he was about her reaction. "You were on Rhaegal. Aegon, the ship was aflame. He was going to die," she said. Annoyedly, "I had to be sure." "So you risked yourself? Do I mean so little to you? Does our babe?" she asked, her voice almost cracking. "Darty," and he said, moving closer to her, Dany raising her hand to stop him from coming closer. "No, Aegon, there was no reason for it. No reason good enough to risk yourself so. I cannot do this alone. We cannot do it alone," she said, before composing herself. "You are a king, a husband, and soon to be a father. You aren't a warrior alone. Aegon, you don't need to do it all by yourself." "I needed to be sure he was dead, Dany. I couldn't risk him getting away. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't. Aegon said, Dany, finding herself confused by his words, and when he turned from her, "Aegon?" she asked, this time taking a step towards him. I saw Raikul fall, Dany brought down by a bolt fired by Euron Greyjoy. I saw it and couldn't let it happen. Had he got away then? Perhaps? Aegon said softly. Why didn't you tell me of this? Speak to me about it. I didn't wish to worry you, Aegon said, moving to her. Then stop being so damn reckless. I cannot have it, Aegon. I can't face it. I do not wish to lose you. I cannot, she said, looking to him. Memories of another time and another man at the back of her mind, that she quickly shook away. Aegon was not Drogo, and she had never felt the way she felt about him with Drogo either. Yet the loss had almost broken her. The thoughts of losing Aegon now threatened to overwhelm her, and so welcomed his arms. When they wrapped around her, "Promise me," she said softly. "Lainey, promise me that you'll not risk yourself like that again. Yakon, say it to me here and now. Just as you made me promise you. You promise me," she said, looking into his eyes, her hands on either side of it as she forced him to look at her. "I promise," he said softly, and she nodded. She tried to enjoy the kiss, and eventually she did, but for the longest time her mind was filled with the same worry that she knew he'd only just had for her. It wasn't a throne she wanted, nor to break the wheel, though she'd work for both. Dany knew what it was she truly desired, and to be so close to having it, and then see it taken from her, it was something she was sure she'd not be able to bear. Kissing him, relaxing in his arms, it was images of the future she saw, and that future only came true if they were together. Their future, their family, only came about if both of them realized that risks weren't worth the reward. No reward was worth their family. The Riverlands 3005 AC. Tyrion. Running was easy. Running to where was where it got difficult, and why it had taken him longer than he had wanted to make his start. He knew he had no choice but to run, but that in him itself left him with choices to make. Choices that almost paralyzed him into inaction. The North was obviously out. Jon Snow was beloved and revered as the hero who brought the dawn, and even him being revealed as Aegon Targaryen would not diminish that. The West, according to the River Lords, was no longer a place where he would be welcomed, and his dreams of one day being the Lord of Casterly Rock would forever end as just dreams, it would seem. He'd hoped the River Lords would at the very least have taken far more issue with the revelation of Jon Snow's truth. In his wildest fantasies, their reaction had been similar to his own when he had heard, but alas, that was not how the news was received. Be it the dragons, the size of the army, the fact that he was married to Daenerys, or a combination of all of those things, the River Lords had knelt and called a bastard a king. For no matter what he may claim or what the papers he carried may say, Jon Snow was a bastard still. The faith didn't accept second wives, and an annulment, even one written by Maynard, could be challenged. Providing there was anyone to challenge it, he thought bitterly as he rode hard through the woods. That was also part of the reason for his delay. It wasn't just where he could go, where he wasn't killed on sight, or dragged back to Daenerys and Jon Snow. But once there, he needed to be able to raise a challenge against them. He had to be able to provoke a response, organize a rebellion, and build up a power base. Do something, anything that would allow him not only to rise, but to thrive. This again gave him problems, as there simply wasn't anyone in Westeros he could think of that not only would or could rise against Jon Snow and Daenerys, but would do so with his input. No one except for the one person who may simply kill him on sight. He rode through the night, fearing that if he stopped, he'd hear the sounds of horsemen behind him. Every so often his eyes would be drawn upwards, and he'd find himself looking to the sky and breathing a sigh of relief when he saw it full only of clouds. By the time he got to the Trident, he had to rest, as did his horse. Tyrion stopping near a small wooded hill and allowing the horse to drink while he threw water over his face and tried to get his mind to figure a different way out of things. He almost didn't hear the cart behind him as his head was dipped under the water as it stopped. When he looked up and saw it, he was relieved to see it was driven by a father who rode with his wife and their children. They were heading south, it would seem, and perhaps he could ride with some of the way. It would be safer for him if they let him join them. "Greetings, friends," he said, shaking the water from his head as he walked over to the man and woman. One of their children climbing up from the back of the cart and looking at him with a look he knew all too well. "What brings you to these parts, stranger?" the man asked warily. Tyrion, noticing how his hand reached down for something and deciding it was best not to get too close. "Like you, I am traveling south. I'm heading to King's Landing," he said, and the man snorted. "Alone?" "Aye, alone," he said, wondering when he started using the northern way of speaking and finding that he didn't know. "You'll find naught but suffering there. Best you ride elsewhere." The man said his hand had found whatever it was he was looking for, and his voice sounded far more confident now. Perhaps we can share some of the journey. Company is always welcome, is it not? He asked as charmingly as he could. I find my own company to be all I need. Good fortune to you, the man said, as the cart began to move away. Tyrion, finding to his dismay that he didn't have the words to convince the man to let him join, they were lost to him, and it bothered him greatly. Even when he finally stopped for sleep later that night, he couldn't stop thinking of that particular failure. It was like so many others of his recently, all down to his mind, and he struggled with it for most of the night. His sleep was fitful and he woke constantly, finding himself both afraid of the real danger that would surely come his way and the idea that he wasn't as clever as he always had been. He was the Ep8, the demon monkey, the cleverest man in Westeros, and yet he'd been outsmarted by a bastard and a queen that had shown no such smarts before. They had played him. He could see that now. They had known and had played him, and he couldn't understand how he'd not seen it coming. That was his greatest strength, to see the motives of men before the men themselves even knew them, to know their minds better than they did, and to use that for his advantage. With Daenerys it had been easy. She knew so little about Westeros that she had needed him, and he'd given her good advice when it had suited him. The bad he'd covered up as necessary, and until they'd come north and something had happened with her and Jon Snow, all had been right in his world. How had he not seen it? How had he not noticed the change in her, in him, and when it had happened? His mind was in turmoil as he broke his fast on dried bread in cold water. He had known they were falling for each other. Daenerys' reaction to the trip beyond the wall was proof enough of that, yet he'd not expected that fall to be so complete. That night on the ship was it then. He tried to think, to remember, and found his mind to be uncooperative, thoughts racing through it that said this was a waste of time. A nonsense, the past didn't matter, only the future counted. And yet, there was something nagging at the back of his mind, something he could use if only his mind allowed. Come, boy, we've miles to go yet, he said, shrugging his thoughts from his head as he climbed up on his horse. He rode slower, as he felt there was no chance of horsemen catching up with him. Had they been sent then, they'd have caught him by now, and if it was the dragons who chased him, then he'd not be able to outrun them. There was no point killing his horse to try, and so he rode as if he was on a morning stroll, soon finding his mind filled with thoughts once more. Writing to his sister was perhaps the dumbest or cleverest thing he'd ever done. She'd sent Bronn to kill him, and that made it clear that to her he was still someone she despised and wanted dead, and yet she was the only one who could help him live and thrive. Dorne, the Reach, the Stormlands, the Vale, and Westeros, they were the only other options he had, and he'd easily discounted them one by one. The Dornish would kill him simply for who he was, and the name he possessed, the Stormlands too, as Blackwater Bay had been his idea. He'd thought of the Vale, knowing that was where Sansa went, and while that held its appeals, they'd not welcome him, and he doubted he could trust Sansa to keep him safe. He believed she'd sell him out if he was being completely truthful, to the Vale Lords or even back to Daenerys and Jon Snow for whatever she could wrangle for his life. It would be what he would do to her, after all, and she'd learned the game as well as he had. Aegon was a non-starter for different reasons, as there he was known to be someone in league with the Dragon Queen. It would mean that in most cities he'd lose his head as soon as he arrived, and the only ones where he would not would be the ones under Daenerys' control. The bay she'd named after her children, though, would be no place for him to hide from those children or their mother. Even offering her enemies insight into how the dragons could be defeated or how Daenerys could be defeated wouldn't be enough. Aegon were far too difficult to predict. They could decide to kill him just to send a message or simply for their own amusement. No, it had to be Cersei. Her fear and worry about the Dragon Queen and how she'd feel about Jon Snow's truth would be enough to stay her hand. He'd need to find a way to deal with her after they won, of course, but she was the only one who could. Of that there was no doubt in his mind. As he felt night begin to fall, he looked for a place to sleep and cursed the position he found himself in once more. He was not made for cold ground and cold nights. He belonged in inns, taverns, and brothels, with a woman in his bed or sucking his cock, he thought with a wry smile. Still, for now, this was his lot in life, and so, as he found a place that would work, he tied his horse to the tree. He set a fire and ate the poor fare that he'd been rationing and then lay down to sleep. "You have coin?" the voice called out, and he felt the kick to his stomach, his eyes opening as he looked to the two men who stood over him, and he felt his fear rise. "I don't know, you're welcome to check." he said, knowing they would do so, whether he lived or died. Etham, check the ugly little fucker. The older and uglier of the two men said, Tyrion seeing the rotten teeth of the other man far too clearly as he moved to him, his breath stinking of something he had no wish to identify. He's got nothing, Derek. Ethan said, and he saw the grimace on the older man's face. Then what fucking use is he? Derek said, annoyed. What will we do, Derek? He didn't like the look the man got on his face then, and were it not for the fact that he felt he was about to die then, he'd have noticed the movement behind them. When he did, he almost shat himself, as did the two men who suddenly turned around to find themselves facing the White Wolf. Was this another time and another place he'd have felt relieved at being saved by Ghost, but that the wolf was here now did not fill him with any comfort whatsoever. Not even when the two men ran from Ghost did he feel any better about his situation. Instead, he backed up against the tree he had slept under and found himself staring into red eyes that seemed to look right through him. Being bitten by a wolf was not a pleasant thing. That the bites were to stop him running and not to kill him was something that brought him little comfort. The pain that he felt in his legs and the fact he knew they were now useless, only filling him with fear, as did the red eyes of the White Wolf as he lay down in the grass and stared his way. The blood on Ghost's snout was not only his either. The wolf had also made a meal of his horse as Tyrion watched on. Had he been in any doubt that Ghost had only wished him immobile and not dead, then seeing him feast on horse meat would have removed it very quickly. How he knew they were above him was something he couldn't, or perhaps more precisely, wouldn't ever be able to tell. Drogon and Rhaegal were here, though, that he knew, and he watched as their mother and father, for that was what Jon Snow was now, he felt, made their way towards him. He looked to their eyes and saw no pity, no mercy, and he knew no words of his would talk his way out of this predicament. His mind, his tongue had failed him, and in the end, it was probably for the best that they killed him, since, without the thing that made him who he was nothing. You betrayed me, Tyrion. For the longest time, it would seem, and even after I gave you a final chance, you did so once more. Daenerys said, staring at him, no sadness, no regret, and no feeling in her eyes. I did, he said softly. My wife is a dragon, Tyrion, and you know how dragons deal with traitors. Jon Snow. No, this was not Jon Snow, as he looked at him, as he looked deep into his eyes. The boy he knew was dead, and this man, this king, now stood in his place. Tyrion closed his eyes and tried to think of a time when he was happy, a time when he was the man he had wished to be. He tried to think of Tisha and their cottage, their bed, and her face, and when he could not, he began to cry. His mind had failed him once more, and as he opened his eyes and felt his tears fall, it was to other larger eyes that he looked. Dracarys, they said as one, and his world was suddenly filled with flames, and his final thought was that his tongue was on fire. The Vale 3005 AC. Sainse. The news of Aegon Targaryen had changed the mood in the Vale, her own most of all. Sansa finding herself snapping at servants and being irritable with the ladies of the Vale more than once, while Sweet Robin argued and told the lords of the Vale that they must ride to pay back this insult, Sansa could hear their reticence to do so. Her own reticence among them as to ride was to die, and only a fool wouldn't or couldn't see that. That Robin was a fool bore well for how she'd be able to control him once they were wed. But she needed to assert some of that control now, and so, after yet another night of him almost demanding the banners were called, she decided to act. What she had to do was distasteful, and just touching his small cock with her hand almost made her retch. Sansa happy that he spent so quickly, and yet, as she washed his seed from her hand, she felt her stomach flip. The food she'd eaten was soon in the privy hole, and she washed her face quickly before she re-entered the room. A false smile that she'd painted on her face as she went to bid Robin good night was wasted on the sleeping boy. She hurried back to her own room and felt at least that she'd accomplished her goal. Her sweet words and the movements of her hand had calmed his ire down. As she undressed and climbed into her bed, though a horrible thought came to her mind, and it was one that made sleep hard to come by. It stayed with her when she awoke the next morning, and when she read over the books of the Vale to see how secure they were, and even as she drank tea with the ladies. When she ate dinner that night, she felt it in the pit of her stomach, and as she walked with him to his room that night, she found her thoughts and fears to be true. Will you stay with me, my love, as you did last night? Robin said, looking at her with wide eyes and a stare she knew all too well. Perhaps we should save nights like that for special occasions, my love, she said, kissing his lips and smiling her prettiest smile. Tonight is special occasion, he said, looking at her. His expression changed somewhat. "How so?" she asked. "Because I say it is, and I am Lord of the Vale," he said determinedly. And though she argued some more or tried to do so, without actually arguing, what she had feared came to pass. Standing in the privy later, she washed her hand and then retied her dress. Robin had wished to see her, and though she'd managed to stop him from touching her breast, she'd needed to bear them for him all the same. Once again, he was asleep when she walked from the privy, and so she hurried back to her room, knowing now that she'd started down a path that led only one way. He'd already begun to change things after only one night, and soon he'd not be content with even those changes. Sansa was now not sure if she could keep him from between her thighs before they were wed, and she certainly wouldn't be able to once they were. Although that was a fool's wish and was never going to be the case, as to make her position here as true as it could be, she would need to birth an heir. The thoughts of what she'd do once she had birthed him a son, though, were no longer ones that caused her any doubt. Robin was a man, and had manly needs, and Sansa had no desire to have to be the one to fulfill them, not for him or not for anyone. As she lay in her bed and felt her tears fall, she cursed Jon Snow for putting her in this position, and she knew now that she'd made a huge mistake. "I should have let you die in the battle. I should have held back longer," she said, rolling over to her stomach and letting her tears and sobs be muffled by her pillow. As she made her way to break her fast the next morning, she was once again the picture of a lady, and not even her betrothed's lascivious smile could remove her own painted-on one. She took her seat beside him, and, as they ate, they discussed the things that needed to be done that day. Robin once again letting Sansa take the lead, and she wondered who had done this before she arrived. Had he simply sat in meetings and nodded or thrown tantrums when he didn't get his way? She believed he had, and that he was a lord only in name. His grasp on stores, coin, even military matters were far below her own, and she felt the Vale lords appreciated her taking over, just as much as she did herself. Later in the day, they held a proper meeting where she explained her plans. Sansa telling them how to make more of their stores and how to prepare even better for the winter they faced. She could see the surprise on their faces as she took charge completely, their nods of appreciation being ones that she felt were well-deserved. By the time the meeting was over and they were walking to their in-ring meal, she found she had even forgotten what her night may entail. "My lords, my ladies, you must come quick," a guard said as he rushed into the great hall before they had a chance to begin their meal. "What is it?" she asked worriedly. "The men we sent north. They've returned," the guard said. She hurried outside with the others. Lady Anya, though by far the oldest of them, was already far ahead, and she wondered how the old woman had managed it. That she and Robin were among the very last to reach the courtyard did not bode well, and when she saw Eula crying by a cart, she knew that Lord Roose had fallen. Looking around at the rest of the Knights of the Vale, who'd returned, it was clear that so had many of the others too. It took some time for the events to be relayed to them. Sansa sitting beside Robin as the other lords and Lady Anya asked question after question. The true extent of the victory now becoming clear, and even though she'd known he'd won already, she'd still thought they'd have suffered a bigger loss. Losses that the Knights of the Vale had suffered in great numbers, as there were less than 500 men who'd ever ride again as they once had. She looked at the others and smiled when she sensed the opportunity, Sansa feeling that this presented her with a chance to run her bastard cousin and the dragon bitch down. Jon never forgave the Knights of the Vale for the Battle of the Bastards. He knew without their arrival that he'd have lost, and even after being named king in the north, he forever held that grudge, she said when people stopped speaking. "He did?" Sir Harold asked her curiously. "He did, sir, though I never thought he'd go this far. I never dared believe him to actually sacrifice a man like Lord Yane," she said as Sarah Mitchell looked at her. "You're saying he deliberately sent my good father to die, Lady Sansa?" Mitchell asked angrily, his father looking on as he did so. "What other explanation can there be, sir?" she asked to some nods. "Have Sir Robert brought in here at once," Lady Waynwood said angrily to one of her guards. Sansa hid her smile as Sir Robert Donegal was now called back into the great hall. The man had already spoken to them about the battle against the dead and how it had been won. He told them how almost all of the Dothraki and the Unsullied and both dragons had survived, and though there were losses, they were far less than there should have been. For that, he'd given thanks to the preparations that had been made, as he'd spoken. Sansa had looked around and seen doubt and fear on some of the faces in the room, though the dragons surviving were enough to cause that. Still, there was also the army they may need to face if it came to that, which brought its own worries too. That wasn't what had truly bothered her, though. Instead, it was the respect that she saw on most of those faces that caused her the most concern. Jon Snow had already been named king by other men who were impressed by his ability as a warrior, even if it had been her who'd actually won the day. As the doors opened, she swore there was no way she'd allow these men to follow the same path. Not after all she'd gone through, or after the things she'd needed to do since she'd arrived here. "Sir Robert, my lords," a guard said, and she looked at the man as he now walked into the room. He was broken. She could see that clearly, whether it was by what he'd faced or what he'd lost. Though she couldn't be certain. "Sir Robert, Lady Sansa has suggested that Aegon Targaryen may have wished to see the Knights of the Vale brought low. Would you concur?" Lady Anya asked, and Sansa glared at the woman for phrasing it in such a way. "Aegon Targaryen, my lady?" the knight asked, confused. "Jon Snow, Sir Robert, Sir Seaman Templeton," said annoyedly. "No, my lady, I'd not concur." Sir Robert said, his voice angry, and Sansa felt the eyes of the room turn to her. "He was not jealous of your success at the Battle of the, what was it called again?" Lord Redford asked. "Bastards, my lord. No, far from it, while there was some tension between King John and Lord Royce," Sir Robert said, looking to her with a glare. "There was nothing but respect shown by him to me, or to our knights." "Then explain how we lost more than 2/3 of our men, while by all accounts the other forces didn't suffer nearly the same," Lord Hunter asked. "Even these savages who rode in the charge with you lost less. Is that not so?" Lady Anya asked. "It is, my lady, but it was no fault of King John's," Sir Robot said far more firmly than he'd spoken thus far. "Surely you don't suggest it was my good father's fault?" Sir Maxwell asked angrily. "I do not, sir, and let any man dare say so in my presence, and they'll soon find themselves on the end of my blade. Lord Yerse was a damn hero, as was every other man that survived that battle. Believe me, my lords, good sirs, for there was none ever fought like it before." Sir Robert said, his voice cracking. "Then, what happened, Sir Robar?" Sir Harold asked. "Some of the men broke, Sir Hero. King John gave Lord Yan specific orders. We were to ride through and then regroup before riding through again. Never stop, never engage, ride and ride hard." Sir Robert said, his voice cracking, and Sansa and the others noticing the tears in his eyes as he did so. Some men did not. They broke, they stopped and engaged. And once they did, they were done for. "Done for?" Sir Maxwell asked. "The dead were like nothing I've ever seen, Sir Mickle. Nothing. They didn't break like a line breaks. They didn't lose courage or become disheartened by their losses. They came again, and they never stopped coming. King John knew this to be true, so he told us to ride into them from the side and to ride right through to the other. They were to regroup and do it again, to move, to never stop, and had they, then just like the Dothraki, there'd be more of us here today." "You're saying that savages held true to their orders where our own men did not?" Sir Harold asked, his voice full of shock and disbelief. "They believed in their king and queen, Sir Harold, as do I." Sir Robert said. Sonda felt the apprehension rise in her chest as the Lords of the Vale looked to her, and she swore she saw a smile appear on Lady Anya's face before she spoke. "You think the king a good man, Sir Robert, a good man and true?" Lady Anya asked. "I believe him to be the best of men, my lady. Both he and Queen Daenerys are good and true." "I'd stake my oath on it," Sir Robert said firmly. Later that night, as she walked Robin back to his room, as she undid her dress and bared her breast and reached over to untie his breeches and release his cock, she felt that apprehension in her chest rise once more. "Sansa, is it true that some women use their mouths to give pleasure to a man?" Robin asked, looking to her, his eyes alight, and as she bent her head, she felt her stomach begin to turn once more. The Riverlands, 305 AC. Aegon Targaryen. They had slept on Dragonstone and made love, both of them needing each other for different reasons. Dyrozini felt needed to be certain he was alive and unharmed, and Aegon needed her to help him clear his mind of the thoughts that threatened to bring him to his knees. Thoughts of a dragon falling from the sky and what it led to, thoughts of a throne room that he cared not to see. He had looked at her as she slept and had placed his hand on her stomach. Their babe, their daughter, was alive, and Dany was right. She would need them both. When he had slept, it was in dreams of wolves and not dragons that he'd found himself in. Ghost was stalking, watching and waiting for the right time, and Aegon knew that he'd been given all he wished for in righting this wrong. Once Dany had seen the Iron Fleet for herself, once she had then confirmed that Tyrion had sent no raven to Dragonstone, his fate had been sealed and Aegon had convinced her that it must be done in private. He should be tried, Aegon. He needs to be made to admit to what he did, she said, as they readied to take to the sky. He should, but he cannot. He is a talker. Dany, it's the one gift he has. His ability to twist words, who knows what he may say, or how much damage he may cause. There is also a Guinea to think of too, for I'd not have him see it. Jane said, and she nodded, her agreement being all he needed. After they had dealt Tyrion, they had flown to their forces. They found them on the march and just past the Green Fork. Aegon had been sorely tempted to land when they flew over the Trident. He'd wished to take some time to pray at the Ruby Ford, but they'd been away too long already, and he didn't want there to be fear for them for any longer than couldn't be helped. Dany said that she felt a stirring inside of her too. One she'd felt when she had been parted from her children for too long, and though it was muted, she knew exactly what it was. Lox missed them both, but she missed her rider most of all, the bond already growing between them even before their daughter had arrived. They landed and were greeted by a most welcome sight. Liarix flying fast from Missandei's shoulder and into Dande's arms, the dragon chirping and trilling as Dany stroked her head. Aegon looked to see a worried look on Davos's face and on Jaime's, where the others seemed far more relieved to see them. He smiled and gave a nod to Varys when he saw him amongst the group, and was then almost tackled to the ground by Arya when she pushed past them all to welcome him back. "Don't do that again," she said, hugging him tightly. "You know?" he asked confusedly. "We were so worried, I thought you'd only be gone a day. Don't do that to me again," she said. Aegon realizing she was just worried and didn't know what he'd done. "I'll not," he said, kissing her forehead. "Your Grace," Ser Davos said with a nod. "All is in hand, Ser Davos. Come, let's head back to the camp and speak," he said, as Arya left him to go and join Jorah and Missandei as they spoke to Dany. "We have some visitors, Your Grace, from the west and Lord Tyrion," Davos began. "Will be dealt with in time." "Visitors?" he asked. "Sir Davin Lannister, Your Grace, the Warden of the West," Varys said. "Lord Varys, it's good to see you well," he said as Varys nodded. "You too, Your Grace, both of you." "Your mission was a success?" Varys asked. "It was. Come, let's speak in private, and then we shall find out if we are in need of a new warden or not." As they walked to their tent, he saw the Lannister men looking on. Ser Davin was blonde-haired and had a beard that was neatly trimmed and made out, and he could see the resemblance he shared, albeit faintly, with Ser Naime. He gave the man a nod and received one in return, though he could see the man's eyes were more on the two dragons who'd laid down to rest. Aegon had no need to be close to see the gulp the man gave when Drogon snapped at his brother. The dragons were playing, though he supposed to anyone unaware of their moods, it would look very different. When he reached their tent, he asked for food to be brought, dismissing Dany's objections that she'd already broken her fast. "You're hungry, my love," he whispered in her ear while stroking Liax's head. "You'll make me fat," she said with a small laugh. "Good, then no one will ever try and steal you from me," he said as he kissed her ear, her laugh now bigger as she rolled her eyes before they took their seats. "Your Grace, the Iron Fleet?" Davos asked. "There's no more sad Davos. They were exactly where we expected to find them, and were lying in wait," he said. "However they and Euron Greyjoy will trouble us no longer." "He is dead, Your Grace?" Jaime asked. "By my own hand, Sir Jaime. Aye. Lord Tyrion is a traitor, then it's true," Jair said, his voice showing his contempt, and Aegon found himself looking at Jaime, who looked panicked. "Have him brought before us. We'll speak to him before we decide upon what must be done," Gizzy said, and Aegon was surprised how calmly she did it, though not by the worried look on Jaime's face, which was even bigger now. "He isn't here, Your Grace. We've sent riders after him, but he snuck away not long after you both left." "Sir," Davos said, his voice low. "I wish him to be found, and then tried. Lord Yarx, get word to your little birds. Should Lord Tyrion be sighted then? I wish to know of it. Send word throughout the realm that he is to be apprehended and brought to face the crown's justice," he said firmly. "Your Grace," Varys said with a nod, but made no effort to leave. "Your Grace, my brother, I would ask you to spare his life. I beg it of you," Hiain said, his voice breaking and his eyes glassy. Axelion looked to Danshire and saw her nod. his wife finally truly understanding why they had needed to do what they had in private. "The penalty for treason is death, Sir Jaime," he said, before seeing Jaime's shoulders sag. "However, we shall take what you say under consideration. I give you my word that should Lord Tyrion be found, and brought to us then, his sentence will be merciful. I do this for you, Sir Jaime, not for him." "I thank you, your grace," Jaime said as he relaxed a little. "Sir David, Lord Varys, what can you tell me of him?" he asked, looking to Varys. As with everything related to Varys, it turned out the man had more information on Sir Davin than perhaps even the man in question knew about himself. Aegon wagered. He, like the rest of them, listened as he told them of his father's death at Oxcross and of the vow he had made regarding his beard. Aegon, finding that he could easily understand a man who was not willing to cut it until he gained his vengeance for what had happened, that it was Robb who had stolen his vengeance from him when he killed Lord Karstark, though may prove a problem. He noticed the surprise and somewhat happiness on Jaime's face when Varys told them that there was a plan to marry him to Joy Hill. Jaime's cousin now being the heir to the Rock, and his aunt wished to unite the claims and bring the Lady of Casterly Rock and the Warden of the West together. "Do you think it'll be beneficial or a hindrance having Sir Jaime in the meeting, Lord Varys?" he asked as Jaime looked to him. "Beneficial, your grace," Varys said. "Very well, my wife and I would like to wash and change. Perhaps you all could give us a moment. Sir Davos, you and Sir Jaime should go speak to Sir Davin and tell him that we'll meet with him within the hour. Lord Varys, a moment." "Your grace," Sir Davos said, as did Jaime before they left, leaving them alone with Lord Varys. "Lord Tyrion has already paid the price for his treason, Lord Varys. I'd ask you to send the ravens regardless to all the houses," he said, looking to the man, seeing a sad look on his face before he nodded. "A loss, your grace, but a necessary one." Varys said. "A most necessary one," Dany said as Varys took his leave. He cleaned his hands in the water that was brought in, washed his face, and dipped his head in the bowl. Lord Yerahax squealed angrily at him when he shook his head and water dripped onto the dragon's own, Dany giggling all the while as she changed her clothing. Looking at his wife as she did so, he could see the swell of her belly, his eyes not able to be drawn away from her as he moved over to kiss her cheek and help her tie her dress. That he didn't laugh or make comment when she struggled to fit into it was perhaps the only reason he was fit to stand when Sir Davin was brought to them. Dany taking her seat and sitting with a dress that was only half tied at the back. "Sir Davin," he said as Sir Jorah, Sir Brienne, and Sir Jay all stood by, Sir Davos taking a seat to one side of them. Your grace," Davin said to them both, "are you here to negotiate or surrender?" Dany said, her voice more amused than annoyed, something he was glad to see. "I prefer the former, your grace," Davin said with a small laugh. "As would we, Sir Davin," he said, looking to the man and bidding him sit. They were just about to start that negotiation when Varys came rushing in, Crono following behind him. The look on Varys's face was a worried one, and their master of whisperers came to his side as soon as he told him to. "An army marches our way, your grace. Your grace." Varys said, his voice so soft that even he could barely hear him as he whispered in his ear. "A moment, Sir Davin," he said, rising to his feet and whispering to Davin that he'd be back in a moment. He followed Crono and Varys from the tent, Sir Jaime joining him as soon as he did so, the four of them walking a little bit away from it so they could speak without being overheard. "Sir Davins?" he asked. "No, your grace," Sir Davin brought a small force with him, and they came along the river road. They're camped some miles from here, and Tiugeneau and his men have been watching them. Varys said, "This is true, Calver. The Golden Men have not left, and this army comes from a different direction, east, not west." Kuno said, "Allies or enemies, Lord Varys?" he asked. "I cannot be certain, your grace," Varys said nervously. "A large army, Kuno?" he asked, turning to the other man. "Many men, Calvor." "Sir Jaime, you, Sir Jorah, and Sir Brienne will join us. We must go and see this army for ourselves," Aegon said. "On the dragons, your grace?" Jaime asked, nervously. "It's like riding a horse, Sir Jaime, be it a really large one that breathes fire," he said with a chuckle that was returned by Kitsiono and Varys, though not by the knight, who instead nodded nervously. The realm reacts. The Reach 305 AC. Horn Hill. Talia. Her mother had refused the call. The Raven Scroll was simply left on what had once been her father's desk with all the others. That none came from the Dragon Queen herself was the only reason that they'd not been given to the fire. Talia knew they were on slippery ground, and only that the Reach had no liege lord would see them keep their lands for not answering with some show of acceptance. She also knew that her mother was hurting, and that it was the loss of her brother and not her father that made that so. Yet she mourned them both, and though she blamed the Dragon Queen for their deaths, she blamed them too, despite what Sam had said. Since he'd returned, her brother had fueled their mother's anger with his own. He'd blamed not just the Dragon Queen, but the King in the North as well, something that confused her greatly. Not only was Jon Snow not present when her father and Dickon were killed, but in the letters that Sam had sent her over the years, he'd named him a friend. Something had happened, and yet, just like with their mother and their father before him, she was but a girl, and her place was not to question the Lord or Lady of Hornhill. It confused her, annoyed her, and though she'd befriended the young wilding woman and her son, a son her mother believed was her blood, even though Talia knew he was not, she'd found no answers there either. She made her way to the Master's chambers and found Master Teague to be busy writing in his ledger. The old man most happy to see her and quickly closing the door behind her so they'd not be disturbed. "Have there been any more?" she asked. "No, my lady. The one from Lord Hightower directing us to send men was the last. If any come, I need to see them, Master. Can you keep copying them for me?" "Of course, my lady, but is this wise?" "My mother is not in her right mind. Master, you've seen this for yourself," she said softly, though she knew no one could hear her other than the man she spoke to. "She grieves, my lady," the maester said sadly, and she knew that he, too, had grieved for her brother. "She does, but between her and my brother's animus, I fear we risk losing ever more than we already have," she said, her voice rising slightly, and making her worry clear. "Lord Sam is not a lord, master. What are the vows of the Night's Watch again? Take no wife, hold no lands, father no children. Is that not right? What of the Citadel, master? Do you not have to swear chastity if you wish to forge your links?" "You do, my lady, but Lord Sam said that the King in the North released him from his vows, that he allowed him to come back home because House Tarley needed a lord." The maester said, "My brother says many things, Meister. I find I do not believe most of them," she said, and the man nodded. She hurried from the room and made her way to her own, sitting down on her bed once she reached it. Her brother had changed, and at first she'd put it down to all he'd been a part of. Life at the Wall and beyond, facing off against things she didn't even wish to think on. Now she wasn't so sure it was not something else, and though she hoped she was wrong, she feared she was not. It was at dinner that night that the Raven Scroll came, her brother reading it and getting up to throw it in the fire, a panicked look on his face, and not even Gilly or their mother could get him to reveal what it said. That it ruined his appetite was enough for her to know just how bad it was, and so she waited until the dead of night and made her way to the maester's chambers once more. She knocked softly on the door. She was taken aback when Teague opened it immediately, the maester letting her know that he'd been waiting for her call. "My lady, you must read this," Teague said, and she was surprised to see the broken seal, a white wolf entwined with a three-headed dragon. "Master, this is not a copy?" she asked, and the master nodded. "This one is," the maester said, handing her another which soon had her heart racing. She quickly looked at the first one, and as she read it, she felt the blood rush from her face, the maester looking just as nervous as she was. Once she was done, she told him what to do, and then made her way to the family dining room. Taking her seat, she waited, her eyes drawn to the empty space above the fire where Heartsbane had once rested. Sam had told her that it was taken from him, but not by who or how he'd lost it, and yet kept his life. Time stretched on, and finally she heard the screams and panicked shouts, her mother arriving before anyone else, while Talia sat in what used to be her father's seat. She didn't say a word to her mother, though. She asked her what was going on, Talia instead waiting for her will to be done, and hoping that Keegan was up to the task. When she saw him lead Sam, Gilly, and little Sam into the room and the nod he gave her, she took a deep breath and readied to speak, only for her mother to beat her to it. "Talia, what's going on? You unhand your lord," her mother said angrily to Keegan and the other guards. "I cannot, my lady. I take my orders from the Lady of Hornhill," Keegan said, looking to her. "Talia?" her mother asked, and Talia looked to her brother instead. Sam looking panicked and anything but a lord, while Gilly looked at her pleadingly. She breathed deeply again before she spoke. "It seems my brother was not entirely truthful with us, mother. Were you, Samwell?" she said. and saw her brother flinch at her tone. It was one he should know well, as it was how their father would speak to him. "Talia, they can explain," Sam said, his voice shaky and whiny, and she closed her eyes and shook her head, remembering that tone from when she was a much younger girl. "Talia?" her mother asked as Master Teague then entered the room carrying a bag of coin. "Sam wasn't released from his oaths, Mother. If anything, he's a deserter of the Watch, and only the words of the king are what's stopping me from ordering him to lose his head," Talia said. "The king? What king?" her mother asked. "Shall you tell her, Sam? Or shall I?" "Talia, please. I'm your brother," Sam said, his tears falling. And yet they only hardened her resolve as she rose to her feet and read from the scroll. "To the Lady Talia of House Tarly, by order of their graces, King Aegon and Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen, you are hereby named as the Lady of Hornhill. It is also by their graces orders that Samwell Tarly is named as a deserter of the Watch, a man with no rights to lands, title, or any claim on his ancestral home. As a deserter, the punishment he should face is death, however. His Grace King Aegon would offer you a mercy, Lady Tarly, and not demand you take your brother's head. Cursed is the Kingslayer, and King Aegon will not make you one. You may provide your brother with coin for passage from Westeros, my lady, and you may send him on his way with no retribution or punishment from the crown. But you must do so with this warning. Westeros has no place for deserters, Samwell Tarly, and his grace has already warned you once. Soon enough he will look in your direction, and so once again he leaves you with these words spoken from his own lips. Run, Sam, run for your life, for winter is coming for you, and it brings you fire and blood. The crown has no quarrel with House Tarly, my lady. We would suggest you do not make it so. Sir Davos Seaworth, hand to King Aegon and Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen." She saw the worried and yet angry look on her mother's face before she heard what she thought was water dripping to the floor, and when she looked, she saw Kagan move a little from her brother's side. The small puddle on the ground, evidence enough of what had happened. Looking to Gilly, she saw the girl's own panic, and that stirred something in her heart. "Gilly, you and baby Sam are welcome to stay here. I'll see all is provided for you, your son, and the babe you carry. My brother, however, will be leaving and shall be escorted to Old Town and there placed on a ship to Essos." "I go where Sam goes," Gilly said softly. "Sam, speak to her. Do what's best for her and the children, and don't drag her into this thing with the king," she said, before she walked from the room. Her mother soon followed, and they argued for over an hour. Talia telling her that she'd not change her mind on this and not see Hornhill turned into Harrenhal for an oathbreaker, not even if he had been her brother once. She expected it and was proved right when her mother retired to her rooms. And then as she stood on the ramparts and watched the cart pull off, she found she was proved right again. He took her with him, and she was beginning to believe that he didn't even try to convince her to stay. Talia looked on as the cart carrying Sam, Gilly, and baby Sam made its way up the road, and she cursed her brother for the life he was taking them to. Old Town, Leighton Hightower. 1 moon ago, walking around the city was something he'd not done in more than a year, closer to 2 if he was truly keeping count. To be able to do so with Melora beside him, that had not been even an option to him for more than 10. It was that even more so than the beauty of a city that had his mood so high this morning. Seeing her out in the fresh open air instead of being locked away in her rooms where she had fought the voices in her head for so long. Now there was only one voice, and though he didn't hear it himself, as he had some of the others, he knew this one spoke the truth. They strolled past traders and stalls, Elaine spending coin and looking at his beautiful daughter, finally as she was always meant to be. He watched her charm men, women, and children, heard her laugh at mummers and listened as she spoke, and offered good cheer to any whose path they crossed. He was content and enjoying the day, and would have continued to do so had the guard not came running from the high tower. Leyden not surprised it was Melora who brought his attention to the man, his daughter smiling as she pointed him out. "It is time, father, the truth is to be known," Melora said with a smile as she handed a child some coppers, and he turned towards the guard. "Then, shall we?" he said, offering his daughter his arm. He'd no sooner done so than the guard reached them and handed him the Raven Scroll, Leighton not even needing to look past the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen to know what news it carried. Walking arm in arm with his daughter, they headed back to the high tower and made ready to tell the Lords of the Reach a truth that had waited years to be revealed. The truth that had caused his daughter so much pain and suffering, and in turn had stayed his hand while events occurred that he was powerless to react to. Leighton not taking part in wars or seeking retribution for actions that deserved his fury, not willing to risk losing her to the voices in her head, and so sitting by idly while she was held a hostage of another creature's mind. Now he could do what needed to be done, and though Baelor and Gunthor had gathered their army, it would not be his sons that led it. Instead, it would be he, Leighton of House Hightower, and for the first time in 23 years, he would soon be marching to war. As they reached the Hightower and walked through its halls, he sent men to make sure that everyone was assembled, and then sent others to fetch his sons. Melora walked beside him and seemed to be even more eager than he for what was about to be said, and more importantly, for what was about to come. Baelor arrived first. His son already knew the truth, and had he his way then, he'd have marched by now. It had hurt him to have his own hand stayed, he knew, and so he couldn't begrudge him the spring in his step or the look on his face, nor the smile that came to that face when Leighton nodded and showed him the scroll. Baelor took up position by Melora's side, and as they reached the great hall, they were joined by Gunthor and Garth, and finally by Humfrey, all 6 of them walking into the hall and quickly taking their seats. My lords, my father brings us news," Baelor said loudly, quietening the room down as he retook his seat. Leighton looked out on the faces. Lord Ashford looked eagerly at him, as did Paxter. Mathis Rowan almost looked ready to race to the ships at just the merest indication that he could. Sir John Fossaway held his wife's hand, both of them as keen as each other to be told they were finally allowed to seek justice for their fallen kin. Around the room, the great and the good, the lords of the Reach, all looked to him, and he found his eyes closing of their own accord. A silent prayer coming to his mind, and he gave it a moment. The dead deserved his prayers, and there were those among them that really should be here to witness this, he felt. My lords, I have just received this message from House Targaryen, a message whose seal I've not yet broken, he said, holding it up for all to see. A message not just for me or even the lords of the Reach, but a message for the entirety of the realm. He broke the seal and read out the words, feeling their power as he did so, and watching the reactions of each man as he told a truth that had been hidden for far too long. To the lords and ladies of Westeros, I write to you to reveal a great truth that was kept hidden for 24 years. I name the man known as Jon Snow, for who he truly is. Not a bastard or son of Lord Eddard Stark, as the realm was led to believe, but as Aegon Targaryen, the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, and the true heir to the Iron Throne. Together with his wife, Daenerys, they call upon every man and woman who are loyal to their family to stand with them once more. The time has come to remove false lions from the throne they stole, to see the true king and queen crowned and for the dragons to rule once more. The realm and its people have suffered under false kings and queens for far too long, and just as their graces have beaten the army of dead men that sought our end, they'll do so to any who stand against them. Stand with them, my lords, my ladies, stand with them and see the realm thrive once more. Lord Varys, Master of Whisperers to their graces, King Aegon and Queen Daenerys of the House Targaryen. The room erupted when he finished, shouts, questions, looks to him and to each other. And, as he took his seat, he found himself smiling broadly when Melora rose. The room calmed with a simple raise of her hands, and yet she waited until even after the voices had stilled and the room was silent. She waited before she then began to speak. My lords, we've received a raven telling us that our prince's son lives, that the man who each and every man in this room wished to be our king has left us an heir. House Targaryen is united, my lord, united in the bonds of marriage, a son of Rhaegar and a daughter of Aerys, both ready to rule, and to finally bring this realm peace. It is time to put those doubts behind you, to let go of your petty worries about a bastard king and a mad king's daughter, to look past your wish for blood and revenge. We march for justice, my lords. For justice long in the waiting. We march for something we sought once, something we wished for, with all our hearts. We march for the true dragons, my lord. For King Aegon and Queen Daenerys, we of the Reach. We march for them. King Aegon, Baelor shouted as he rose. Queen Daenerys, Garth said, for the dragons. Leighton looked to the floor and smiled when he saw Mathis Rowan rise. For House Targaryen, Paxter shouted, and soon the room as one rose as the chants rang out. For fire and blood, the shouts rang out. The Crownlands, Antlers, Now, he walked past the tents with Melora by his side, the soft grass of the valley feeling good under his feet as he surveyed the land they had camped upon. Around him more than 10,000 men of the Reach were gathered, the largest force that he could move in the time he had to get here. Paxter would sail the rest of the fleet to King's Landing and blockade it from the sea, and were this an ordinary battle, then he'd feel confident enough. Yet he knew his men were but a token force, they were not needed, and the battle that lay ahead would be won with or without them. They could wait, arrive when the battle was done, and swear their oaths to the king and queen when they had already taken their throne. Melora had seen they would be accepted if they did so, but they'd not be as trusted as they would be by doing as they did now. Not that his reasons for being her had anything to do with being accepted or trusted. He was here because here was where he was supposed to be, and as he looked at his daughter, he knew his reasons why. "He will be here soon?" he asked, as Melora smiled at him. Their scouts had already told him the Targaryen army was but days away. "He is here now, father," Melora said as she directed his eyes up to the sky. "By the gods," Leighton said as he fell to his knees and looked up to see dragons fly over his head. He smiled when he saw the figures on their back, one silver-haired and one dark, and as he saw the men in white cloaks behind each of them, the words came unbidden to him. "Gergold, your death was not in vain," he said, thinking of his uncle as the dragons landed in the open space that Melora had brought him to. The Crown lands 305 AC. Aegon, seeing the banners and what houses they represented, answered. Aegon looked to Dany and nodded, his wife Sarah Brienne and Ser Jorah soon circling the ground, as Rhaegal landed and he and Jaime climbed down off the dragon's back. A moment later, Jorgon, too, was on the ground, and as Dany climbed down and walked over to him, the three Kingsguard took up their positions. They didn't have long to wait, as the riders soon approached. Aegon looking back to Rhaegal, who along with Jorgon was looking warily at them. He did his best to calm the green dragon, and hoped that in doing so, Jorgon, too, would sense that there was no danger here. "These are men of the Reach, Dany. See the golden tree of House Rowan, the white sun of Ashford, the grapes of red wine, the green apple of Fossaway," Aegon said, drawing her attention to the banners that flew over the tents in the distance, his eyes alert as the horses drew nearer. "That's the Hightower sigil, isn't it?" she asked, seeing the banner with the white tower and the flames atop it. "It is," he said as he was finally able to make the horsemen out. "Varys said these men are ours," she said with a smile. "We're about to find out, my queen," he said, making that smile grow larger. Behind them, the dragons looked on, making their intent clear. Should these men and a woman, as Aegon noticed, there was one amongst them looking his way. Should they be false, they would burn. Aegon didn't think them false, though. Not only had Varys told them about his meeting with Ser Baelor in King's Landing, but the looks on the faces of those who dismounted were anything but unwelcoming. He was, however, surprised when, as soon as the 6 men and 1 woman reached them, they as one knelt. "Your graces, on behalf of my house and the houses of the men alongside me, our Lord Laven Hightower, do welcome you both to our camp. We come to swear fealty to the true king and queen of Westeros, your graces. We come to join our army to your own. Our swords, our loyalty, we offer it to you both, from now until the end of our days." Lord Laven said, and Aegon saw the 3 Kingsguard knights relax as he bid those in front of him to rise. "Rise, my lords. On behalf of my wife and I, we accept your fealty." Aegon said, and he could see that the smiles both on Dany's face and on the lords were true. "Your grace, perhaps you and her grace would join us. We've organized for refreshments to be prepared." The woman said, and Dany looked to her curiously. "My daughter, Lady Melora, your grace." Lord Leighton said, when he saw Dany's expression. "We'd be most happy to, Lady Melora," Dany said with a nod. Aegon took notice of how some of the lords looked at the dragons. There was awe in most expressions and fear in some, but it was Lord Leighton's expression that seemed the most eager. The man looking behind where he was standing, and almost willing the dragons closer. "Would you care to meet my wife's children, Lord Leighton?" Aegon asked, the lord nodding enthusiastically as Aegon bid him forward. Dany stood speaking to the Lady Melora and the other men. Aegon, knowing now that they represented most of the house's sigils, he'd identified to her, while he, Jaime, and Lord Leighton walked over to Rhaegal. He leaned close to the green dragon when he got there to tell him that these were friends. Aegon then turning back to the lord to bid him closer. "Rosiegel, my lord, he'll allow you to touch him." Aegon said with a smile as Leighton's eyes grew larger. Your Grace, Leighton said as he reached out his hand. The look on his face one of almost childlike wonder as he stroked Rhaegal's scales. After doing so for a few moments, Aegon noticed more horsemen arrive, these men bringing spare horses with them, and he looked to Dany, who was laughing and japing with Lady Melora and the other lords. His wife was enrapturing them, as she did everyone that took the time to get to know her. Aegon smiled at her when she looked his way and nodded, and then he turned and told Rhaegal to go and eat. Drogon looked to his brother for a moment before the two were in the sky, and Aegon heard the breath that Laeney took when he saw them leave the ground. A wondrous sight, Your Grace, one I'd wished my entire life to see, Leighton said, smiling as they walked back towards the others. He heard the end of a conversation when he got there. One of the lords was arguing with the men who brought the horses for not bringing a carriage. Aegon smirked when the man was told that a horse was no way for the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms to travel. Dany didn't correct him with words, but instead walked over to the said horse and mounted it expertly before sitting on it, his wife looking at him and the others as if to tell them to hurry, which brought a chuckle from him. And soon enough they were riding back to the camp. Once there they were offered guest rights, which he gratefully accepted. Their King's Guard, however, did not just to show their intent should they be playing them false. Both he and Dany were of the same mind, though, and the welcome they'd received as well as the houses that had received them only reinforced that these were their men now. They ate and drank what was some of the best fare they'd had since they left Dragonstone many moons earlier. Aegon watching the faces of the men as the table was cleared and each of the lords was introduced to them. Hightower, Ashford, Redwine, Fossaway, Rowan, Caswell, Crane, Oakhart, almost all the major houses of the Reach were present, and the presence of Lord Leighton, his heir, his daughter, and another of his sons showed just how true the Reach's support truly was. Aegon once again noticed how happy his wife was by this showing of loyalty. He could understand that completely, as after how she'd been welcomed into the north by Sansa and some of the northern lords, Dany had been hurt. She'd come to them as a savior and been treated as unwelcome, as a stain, and had even been named as such by some of the lesser lords like that fool Glover. When the mountain clans had accepted her so warmly, when she'd seen how the people had felt about her, and even when the river lords had knelt, Aegon had seen how much it truly meant to her. To now see a kingdom that had ever been loyal to the dragons do so too, he found himself smiling as he reached out his hand to touch her own. His wife gripping it and holding it as they readied to accept the Reach truly back into the fold. My lords of the Reach, Lady Melora, my husband and I welcome your fealty, though I do have a question about the timing of it. Dane said while still holding her hand, Your Grace, had Lady Olenna lived then, we'd have come to you along with her own forces. We were loyal to her, and to you also. Lord Rowan said, Not all of the Reach lords were loyal to my wife. My lord, Yaxlid, looking to the man, who then swallowed dryly. Toxley was a fool. Your Grace, for what reason other than the man's own ambitions he chose to abandon his oaths? I know not. I assure you that no one here played a role in his treason. Nor have we forgotten it, Sir Jon Fossaway said. Lady Olenna was your kin, Sir John, yours too, Lord Leighton. I'd not accuse either of you of forgetting it. However, my wife didn't receive any messages of support from any of the Reach lords, which I believe is what vexes her now. Aegon said, On that, Your Grace, I must admit that you played a part. Leighton said, looking to them both. You didn't come to me because of my husband? Dany asked angrily. Partly, Your Grace. With Olenna's death, the Reach was left with a focal point, a figure to rally to. I'm afraid in that I've been most remiss for many years, mainly because of his grace. Leighton said as Aegon looked to Dany. I don't understand, Dany said, shaking her head. We were waiting for him, Your Grace, for you both. Together, you are the king and queen that the realm needs, and so my father and I waited. Melora said. He looked to Dany, who still seemed just as confused, and to the Lady Melora, who was watching him curiously. Aegon not sure what to make of what the woman was saying, but it mattered little for now anyway. The past is the past, and while we must always remember it, we can never be tied down by it. My wife could hold it against you all that you waited. I could bear a grudge against you that you did not come to her side earlier. Had things turned out differently, then the lack of your support could have caused this war never to have been able to occur. Yekin said, squeezing Dany's hand to have her continue. But we seek to chart a new future for the realm, and so we shall not hold your reticence against you, and instead welcome the fact that you are here now. on behalf of King Aegon and myself, will accept that the Reach stands with the dragons once more." Dany said to relieved looks and smiles. They sat and listened while Lord Leiden told them that Lord Paxter had sent ships to begin the blockade of King's Landing, but that he feared the Ironborn may cause a problem. Aegon letting Dany tell them that the Ironborn fleet was no more, and then adding that his wife had seen to it with his help and the help of their dragons. Dany looked at him curiously, and he knew she was wondering why he was giving her so much of the credit. They declined the offer to stay, and instead said they needed to rejoin their men and that they'd catch up with the lords on the road to King's Landing. He asked for a moment alone with Dany, and as the lords left the tent, Lady Melora stopped to look at him. "Your Grace, I wonder if I may have a word alone with you regarding the three-eyed raven," Melora said, looking at him, her eyes taking in his expression, and her one he couldn't place. "Anything you need to say can be said in front of my wife, Lady Melora," he said, and he saw her look pleadingly at him and then at Dany, who nodded. "Very well, if you'd give me a moment with my wife first." The woman nodded and left them alone. Aegon turning to Dany, who looked at him curiously, his wife smiling when he leaned forward to kiss her deeply, and then chuckling as she spoke to him. "You just wished me alone to kiss me. Did you fear to do it with all our new allies watching?" she asked, her smile and tone, making it clear she was japing with him. "I'd not wish them to be jealous of me any more than they already are. It's bad enough I've got a crown and a dragon. Should they see how much my wife truly means to me, they may think me truly blessed by the gods," he said, watching as her lip curled upward as she laughed loudly. "Whatever happened to my quiet northern fool who'd say no such words but only think them?" she asked, smiling still. "As you say, he was a fool and I am not," he said, before sticking his tongue out, Dany shaking her head as she laughed fully. "Yes, my love, you're so not a fool," she said, laughing. "Still, I think we can trust him, Dany. I think they speak the truth," he said when she'd stopped. "As do I. Why didn't you tell them it was your plan to attack Euron?" she asked. For some reason there is something else going on here. I don't doubt their loyalty, but I feel their reticence, and now lack of it, is because of knowing who I am. Whether that is, as the Lady Melora says, because they wished us to be together, or because they wish for a king, and not a queen, I do not know as of yet. So I want them to know who my queen is," he said, looking at her. "You think they wish only you to rule?" Dany asked, her voice shaky. "I think they want us both, Dany. What I don't know and mean to find out is why," he said, and she nodded. "Besides, what they want and what we give them are two separate things, are they not?" After they'd spoken, he walked from the tent with Jaime behind him, a guard directing him to where the Lady Melora was waiting. Aegon saw her standing out in the open and looking to the sky as if she was awaiting the dragon's return. She heard his footsteps and turned around with a smile on her face. Aegon, noticing how she looked at him as if she was taking him in completely. "Long have I wished to meet you, my prince," Melora said, and Aegon felt his breath hitch in his throat. "The Crown lands 305 AC. Arya?" She sat with Missandei and looked at her as she held Ladex. The red dragon was now sleeping in the scribe's arms, while Ghost looked on. The White Wolf had returned not long after Jon and Dande had flown off to meet with the army that marched ahead of them, and that more than anything had calmed her fears for her brother and good sister. If they were in any danger, then Ghost would have gone to them, and so it allowed for her to relax. Arya sitting and enjoying the sight of the White Wolf and Red Dragon as Ghost stared and sized the new arrival up. "You should put her to bed," Arya said, as she saw Mission's eyes were beginning to close. "She'll only rest in my hands until their graces return," Missandei said, her voice almost a whisper. "Then you should go to your own bed," she said softly. But the girl shook her head. "She'll also not sleep in my tent," Missandei said as her hands stroked the sleeping dragon. "There's a bed over there," Arya said, pointing to Jon and Dany's bed, and almost laughing at the shocked look that came over Missandei's face at the thought. "I could not," Missandei said, shaking her head. "You're looking after their babe's dragon. They'd understand. Go. Should there be words spoken of it, then I'll take the blame. My brother loves me. He'll understand," Arya said, smiling. The girl shaking her head, but doing what she told her to. Once she knew she was asleep, Arya left the tent and told the guards outside that Missandei was resting. She walked towards her own tent, and when she saw Grey Worm, she told him the same thing. The Unsullied leader, turning towards Jon and Dandy's tent to guard who was inside, and perhaps to join her in the bed also, Arya thought with a smile. Reaching her own tent, she was unsurprised to see Gendry inside, nor that he was already undressed, and as much as she wished to join him, she knew she could not. She'd been putting this talk off for far too long, and her uncle's words still reverberated in her head. Family, duty, honor. She was a Tully as much as she was a Stark. Edmure had said. Arya closed her eyes and remembered the conversation as if it was yesterday, and not many days earlier. Nis, is it truly you? The red-haired man said as he walked her way. Arya looking to him and trying to place him. Uncle Edmure? She asked as he embraced her. Hi, child, it's so good to see you, Akia. Truly. I'd worried that I'd never get to see my kin again, Edmure said. It's good to see you too, Uncle. I'm sorry, she said softly when he let her go. You've nothing to be sorry about, niece, Edmure said, smiling at her. I left you there, Uncle, in the twins. I left you there. You and the others. I was so focused on my vengeance that I never thought, she said, looking to the ground in shame. It was you, he asked softly, and she nodded. Then you've nothing to be upset about, Arya. Were it not for what you did then, I'd not have been released. True, you mayhap could have done so, but it was for the best. It was my wife who did it in the end, Edmure said, and she looked at him curiously. Why? Had it been you then, perhaps Rosalind and I would never have spoken. I may have gotten to know her or my son. I'd certainly not have a daughter now. Your actions gave us time, Arya, and time truly is the best healer, Edmure said with his hand on his shoulder. You are well, Uncle, your wife, children, she asked, as he nodded. Come, I'd like you to meet your cousins, Edmure said happily. She had met them both, Brendan and Catelyn. The girl's red hair and blue eyes, and hearing her name all had brought tears to her eyes. But it was what her uncle had said when they spoke of Sansa, of Winterfell, and of her future that had caused her sleepless nights since. I don't want it, Uncle. It's not the life I wish for. Arya said after Edmure told her that given the path Sansa was on, she was the only Stark, the only Tully who could rule the North. Life is what we make of it. Yadya, do you think I wished for the one I was given? We live, we love, and we make the best of what we have. We deal with it. You know the words of my house, your mother's house. Family, duty, honor, she said softly. Aye, and as my uncle, your great-uncle Brendan would always say, family comes first. It took me a long time to understand that, to realize that it wasn't just those who lived, but those who came before and after us that the words spoke of. You are the last of your line, Arya, the last family you have. Jon is my brother, she said determinedly. Aye, but not by blood. He is a Targaryen, not a Stark. A Stark, not a Tully. You are the last of your mother's blood, Arya. The last of your father's family. Duty, honor. Winter is coming. That's who you and you alone are. I'll not tell you what to do with your life, how to live it, or what your path is. I simply ask you to remember who you are. She shook the thoughts from her head and slowly undressed before climbing into the bed beside Gendry. When he looked at her with concern in his eyes, she smiled and shook her head. Taking his head in her hands, she brought him close and felt his lips, his tongue soon searching out her own. Soon they were locked in a passionate embrace, and then he was inside her. Arya welcoming the feeling of him and feeling her release when his own came. They lay together in each other's arms, and she soon drifted off to sleep. Her dreams were filled with memories of Winterfell and her childhood, of Jon and her racing through the Godswood, and of stealing a lemon cake from Sansa's plate. She saw Robb, Bran, Rickon, and her mother as they went about their day. Arya heard the sound of clapping and looked to the balcony to see her father standing there and the smile on his face. When she woke, it was to find her tears falling and Gendry looking at her with such concern, such tenderness that she sobbed against his chest and let his words and arms comfort her. He didn't ask her what was wrong, and he didn't prod her to tell him what she was thinking. Instead, he just held her, spoke softly to her that he was here for her, and allowed her to cry herself out. When she did, she looked at him and kissed his lips softly before moving away. Marry me, she said, catching him by surprise. Irazie, marry me, she said, and he nodded and said he would. They made love once more, and she smiled as she looked at him sleeping beside her. Kissing him softly on the forehead, she rose and dressed and took the small pouch from her pack before walking outside. She moved a little way and opened the pouch. The smell of the liquid inside it, Eddis making her retch. Moon tea was not a pleasant-smelling thing, nor something that she liked the taste of, and as she looked at it, she found she had no desire to drink it. After pouring it out onto the ground, she looked at it as it pooled there, and she nodded to herself. Family, duty, honor, she said, before turning to head back to the tent. The Crown lands 305 AC. Melora, she saw in her father's eyes just how much seeing dragons in the flesh meant to him, to her too, although it was a different dragon that took most of her attention. Echo wasn't how she had expected him to be, but he was how she hoped he would. How close he was to his wife, how he made sure that it was Daenerys and not him that was the center of attention. This was not what her dreams and visions had shown her, and yet it was only now that she was seeing them clearly. For far too long, she'd been afflicted with visions that didn't come true, dreams that seemed real, and yet were not. So much so that amongst the lies and untruths, the truths often went by unnoticed, undiscerned, and to her dismay, often unrealized. She'd seen the prince rise and fall, seen a boy die alone at the wall only to rise again. Dragons had flown high in the sky, and dragons had been brought low over ice and water. For most of her life, she'd watched as the realm burned because of the ambitions and greed of men, and yet she'd seen it soar because of the love of one also. As she waited for Aegon to come to her, Melora looked to the sky and thought back to the clarity that came to her. The vision that finally showed her the true path and how it made all the lies and untruths simply fade away. It had been moons ago. Her sleep was as tortured as it usually was. Images of death, destruction, of the fall of a queen, and the slow passing of time while watching a broken man wait for his own end. Suddenly she had seen it all for true. A prince rising to become a king, and a love that would define a generation. Clarity, finally, she thought with a smile as she heard the footsteps behind her and turned to see the prince, the king standing there. "Long have I wished to see you, my prince," Melora said as he looked at her. A shocked look on his face as he stared at the recognition in her eyes. "You know?" he asked softly. "I've seen it, my prince. The past, the future. I've seen the life you lived and the life you are yet to live." Melora said. "How?" he asked curiously. "The three-eyed raven, my prince. I believe he reached out to me when I was but a girl. I have memories of another time, of a black bird and of being asked to fly," she said as she bid him walk with her. "Did you?" he asked, catching her by surprise. "I fell, my prince," she said softly. "I fell but did not fly, and after that I saw but did not know." "What did you see?" he asked. "I saw a silver prince fall into waters of red, as rubies flew from his chest. I saw a boy born a king, and raised as anything but. I saw you fall, though I knew not it was you, and I saw you rise and bring forth the truth," she said, looking to him and noticing how he was staring back at her. "What else?" he asked. "I saw a broken man sit by a tree and beg for death, a man who spent years mourning the life he took and the love he lost." She looked at him as his shoulders sagged, her hands moving to stop him from falling to the ground, and she saw his Kingsguard move from behind him. Aegon raising his hand to stop Soryeme from interfering as he straightened himself up. When she looked into his face, she saw the same broken man from behind the wall staring back at her, and she cursed herself and the vision she had. Shaking her head clear of such thoughts, she spoke softly to him when he closed his eyes as if he was blocking the world from his view. "This is not a burden you must carry alone, my prince, and you should have no fear that I'll speak of this to another, not even my father. The words I share with you today are for you and you alone," she said as he looked at her. "Why you?" he asked, looking at her. "Why do you care? When you were brought back, my prince, when the gods intervened, it was not only you who was given another chance. In that world, in the world where those events take place, my fate was set. My life ended the day hers did. My prince, a fall, as I tried to fly once more," she said, looking deep into his eyes. "And in this one?" he asked. "As with you, I've been given a chance to right wrongs. The reach is yours, my prince, yours and her graces. Others will come too. They will come and do so not because you are Aegon Targaryen, or because she is Daenerys Targaryen. They will come not because of the dragons or the war you've already come. Then why? Together you shall herald in the dawn of an age that none have known. Your children, their children, the truth of House Targaryen's promise lies in you both. The prince that is promised shall bring the dawn, and you are that prince. Already you've seen to the end of the Night King, and you've stopped the three-eyed raven from imposing his version of the future on the world. There are battles ahead, my prince, Battles not just in this land, but in others too. You and she must fight them and win and live the life you should have, together as one. One love, one house, one family. Melora said, her voice almost rising as she did so. Lord Ye moved from her and looked to the sky. Melora finally seeing the dragons returning, and she waited with him until they had landed. He stood for some time just looking at them, the green one looking her way, almost as if it was watching her for him. After some time, he turned to look at her. His eyes looked different, his expression set, and she could see the determination in his features. You will fly back with us to our camp, my lady. Perhaps your visions can help bring about this future you say. My wife and I are destined to create. I will have no word spoken of my other life. That man is dead, and it's only this one who stands before you now. Aegon said as he stared at her, his eyes promising a painful fate should she disagree. As you wish, my prince, she said with a bow of her head. Aegon walked past her, and she followed in his wake. Sir Jaime joining them as they walked to the tent, and Melora smiled as she was bid enter it. After him, she listened as Aegon told his wife that she'd be joining them, and as he sent one of the guards from outside to fetch her father so he too could be told. Though there was no need to do so, as she'd already told him of her path and why she needed to walk it. The Raven was dead, and would play no role in the future. But the gods had a plan, and she had a place. And that place was by the side of their chosen, both of them. The Crown lands 305 AC. To Dany, she had accepted it when Aegon said that the Lady Melora was to join them, her husband telling her that he'd explain it fully when they returned to their camp. Still, as she looked at the woman with her arms around Aegon's stomach as they flew alongside them, she felt her jealousy begin to rise. That Aegon was only looking forward and paying the woman no attention, only comforted her slightly. When they reached their camp and climbed off the dragons, they were joined by Ser Davos, Varys Arya, Missandei, and Grey Worm. Aegon asked Ser Brienne to see to a tent for Lady Melora, and when the knight and the lady left their side, he came over to her. I'll tell you more when we're alone, but we can trust her, Dany, Aegon said as he kissed her cheek and whispered in her ear. Very well, she said, a little more abruptly than she liked, not liking one little bit the smirk on Aegon's smirk face. The army was the Reaches, and its lord Ser Davos. They've now sworn to her grace, and I, Aegon said, relaxing their hands' worries. Sir Diavin, your grace, he's most keen to speak to you. Davis said, and Aegon nodded. Give her grace and I a moment, Sir Davos. Then have Sir Davin brought to us. Your grace, Davos said to Aegon, and then to her. They walked back to the tents, Arya looking to speak to Aegon and Missandei, telling her that Liakat's was resting, though the girl looked guilty for some reason. What that reason was would have to wait, as Dany wished to speak to her husband and to find out why Lady Melora was to be part of their accompaniment now. That small jealous spark inside of her was threatening to become a flame the longer she was left in the dark. When they reached the tent, she walked in before Aegon did, and she was already turned and waiting for him when he entered. The kiss was long and deep, and caught her by surprise. Her hands lay still by her sides for a few moments before she wrapped them around Aegon's neck and began to kiss him back just as passionately as he was her. When they finally broke apart, she smiled to see that he was just as breathless as she was. To Dany raising her eyebrow before she asked him the first question that came to her mind. While I very much enjoy my husband's kisses, may I ask why that one? She asked, looking at him. I wish to kiss my wife, but felt the Reach Lords may not enjoy seeing me do so in their tent, and would certainly not like to see me when I take her on their desk. Aegon said, moving to her, Dany laughing as she pushed him away. Lady Melora, Aegon, she asked when he looked at her. Those things, Dany. She's had some of the same visions as I did. It's why she brought the Reach to us, as Aegon said. She did? She asked confusedly. She told her father of me, of you, of us. She says she's seen the world we'll create, the world you and I will create together. Odson moving to her, and she knows. Knows, she asked, that together we're far more than either of us are apart. Aegon said, and she kissed him softly. A smart woman, she said, making him chuckle. Let's see if Davin Lannister is just as smart a man. Aegon said, and she nodded her agreement. Aegon walking to the front of the tent to send for the Westerland's lord. She agreed they'd not speak of the Reach with Sir Davin, instead speaking only of the West until they ascertained what his reason was for coming to them. Dany walked over to look at Larysix, who slept soundly in the bed, a bed that was messed up for some reason, and she smiled at the baby dragon as it slept comfortably. Sir Davis and Targaryen were the first to arrive, their hand taking a seat, and then Varys arriving a few moments later before Targaryen and Brienne escorted Sir David inside. "Forgive us our absence, Sir Davin. Please take a seat," Aegon said, and the knight did as he bid. "That's quite all right, your grace. I trust all is well?" Davin asked. "It is Sir the are," Aegon said before he turned to her and gave her a small nod. "Sir Davin, am I right in thinking you've come to pledge your sword and the Westerland's men to our cause?" Dany asked. "I have your grace," Davin said. "Why, sir?" she asked, looking at him. "Cersei Lannister is not my queen. Your grace, not only has she no legal claim on the throne, but even had she, I would not kneel to her, not after what she has done," Davin said, looking back at her. "Which is?" Aegon asked. "I know it was Cersei behind what happened at the Sept of Baelor. She may claim otherwise and may seek to blame it on her brother or on you, your grace. But I know it was her," Davin said. "And this is the only reason you've come?" Dany asked. "It is not, your grace. As Warden of the West, my job is to protect the West and to answer the Crown's call. Since I believe Cersei Lannister is not my queen, then that makes you and his grace the Crown. This is even more true now," Davin said. "Why now?" Aegon asked, and Daddy caught him looking to Varys, who nodded. "Because I've been told the truth of you, your grace, of who you truly are," Davin said. "And this makes a difference?" she asked, looking to Aegon. "May I speak frankly, your grace?" "You may see her, Davin," she said with a smile. "I came to kneel to you, your grace, and to his grace, even though there were and are those in the West who took issue with his grace's perceived birth. Now that the truth is known of him, those men will raise no question. Oh, don't get me wrong, your grace. They'd have knelt along with me, but they'd have spoken in hushed whispers about doing so to Jon Snow. When they kneel to Aegon Targaryen, those whispers will never be spoken," Davin said. "What does the West ask for? Its fealty, Sir Davin?" Aegon asked. "I'm to be married, your grace, to Sir Jaime's cousin, Lady Joy Hill. I would ask for her to be legitimized, your grace, and that she keeps her position as the Lady of Casterly Rock," Davin said, looking to them both. "And not your own position as Warden of the West?" Dany asked curiously.